Hello, Reading Room. How are you? Thanks for joining me. I am Dr. Annette Feravich, and we are reading the classic story, Heidi. We are on, or through the corridors. She looked round about her toward the corners and then quickly behind, as if she thought someone might come quietly along and pull her dress without being seen. But she did not go about Annette to come with her, in case, she said, there should be anything to carry up or down. I see we've got the wheel of death going on, so hold on just a minute so we don't have choppy waves throughout our story. Well, let's see. Okay, I'm back with, very, very, very poor signal. All the fall colors down there in the signal. Tanette, in her turn, did the same. When she had any business upstairs or down, she called Sebastian to accompany her in case there was something to be moved that might be too heavy for her strength. Strangest of all, Sebastian did the same. If he was sent to a distant part of the house, he begged John to come too, and for the same reason, lest he might not be able to produce what was wanted. And each responded to the other's call, although there was really nothing to bring up or down. It was as if each one knew that similar help might be needed in his own case. And while all these things were happening above stairs, the old cook stood amidst her pots and pans, saying thoughtfully, with many sighs and shakings of her head, "To think that I should live to see such goings on." Certainly something very strange had been taking place in the Seisman house for some time. Each morning when the servants came downstairs, the house door stood wide open, but no one was to be seen, far or near, who could have any connection with the fact. When this happened the first time, every hole and corner was searched throughout the house in fear that something had been stolen, for of course everyone thought that a thief had hidden himself in the house and carried off his plunder in the night. But nothing had been stolen. Nothing in the whole house was missing. At night, the door was not only double locked, but fastened with wooden beams. It did no good. In the morning, it stood wide open, and no matter how early the servants in their excitement might come downstairs, there stood the door open, though everybody in the neighborhood was asleep, and all the other houses were fastened securely. Who do you think that might be? At length, Sebastian and John took courage and prepared themselves in accordance with the urgent request of Miss Rottenmeier to pass the night below in the room that opened into the big hall, and there to wait and watch for what might take place. The housekeeper got out several weapons and Mr. Sebastian's and gave them a big flask of spirits so that they might have means of refreshment as well as defense. On the appointed night, the pair seated themselves and began at once to partake of the refreshment, which soon made them very sleepy, whereupon they both lay back in their armchairs and went fast asleep. When the old tower clock struck 12, Sebastian roused himself and called his comrade, who was not so easily awakened. As often as Sebastian spoke to him, so often he turned his head to the other side of his chair and still slept on. Sebastian listened intently. He was now very wide awake. All was still. Not even in the street was anything stirring. Sebastian did not go to sleep again. It was too uncomfortable there in the silence. He aroused John, but only with a smothered voice, and shook him now and then a little. At last, about 1 o'clock, John awoke and remembered why he was in the chair and not in his bed. Suddenly he felt very brave and said, "Now, Sebastian, we must come out of this and see what is going on. You needn't be afraid. Come behind me." John opened the door of the room that had been only partly closed and went out. At the same moment, a sharp draught coming from the open house draft. Yeah. I mean, I know it's a word. I'm just like, why? Why is that funny? At the moment, a sharp draft coming from the open house door put out the light that he had in his hand. He started back, knocked Sebastian, who stood behind, into the room, shut the door quickly, and turned the key and lock rapidly as many times as it would go round. Then he pulled out his matches and lighted his lamp. Sebastian did not rightly know what had happened, for he had been sheltered, standing as he did behind the stout John from the draft. When, however, he saw his comrade by the lamplight, he gave a cry of alarm, for John was white as chalk, and shook like an open leaf. "What was there outside?" asked Sebastian anxiously. "Wide open stood the door," whispered John, "and on the steps was a white figure, Sebastian, just going down, and whist, it disappeared." Sebastian felt creepy down his whole back. Now the two men seated themselves close together and did not stir again until it was bright daylight and the streets began to fill with movement. Then, going out together, they closed the front door that had stood wide open all this time and went to tell Miss Rottenmeier what had happened to them. As soon as she heard what they had seen, she seated herself and wrote to Mr. Seisman such a letter as he had never before received, saying that he must come home at once without delay, for unheard of things were taking place. She recounted then what had occurred, that the house door was found wide open every morning, that nobody in the household felt secure, as it was impossible to foresee what events these mysterious signs might portend. Mr. Seisman replied that it was impossible for him to drop everything and come away at such short notice. The ghost story he found very absurd, and hoped that the excitement would soon pass over. If it did not quiet itself, he begged Miss Rottenmeier to write to Mrs. Seisman, who would undoubtedly come at once. He was sure that she would quickly put a stop to all spectral apparitions, and so effectually that they would not dare to show themselves in his house again. Miss Rottenmeier did not feel pleased at the tone of this letter. The thing was not considered of enough importance. She wrote as directed to Mrs. Seisman, and did not get more comfort from that lady's answer, which contained some very unpleasant remarks. Mrs. Seisman stated that she had no intention of traveling from Holstein to Frankfurt because the Rottenmeier saw ghosts. Formerly, there were no such things as ghosts to be seen in the Seisman house. If any were wandering there now, they must be living creatures with whom the Rottenmeier might easily settle. If she were not equal to that, then she could call the watchman to her aid. The housekeeper was not inclined to pass her days in terror, and knew very well how to help herself in an emergency. Up to this time, she had refrained from telling the children about the apparition, for fear that they would not be willing to remain alone day or night, which would inconvenience herself exceedingly. Now she marched straight to the study where they were sitting together, and told them in a mysterious whisper of the nightly appearance of an unknown being. Clara declared at once that she would not be left alone for a moment. Her papa must be sent for, and Miss Rottenmeier must come to sleep in her room, nor must Heidi be left alone, for fear the ghost should come to her. They would all sleep in one room, and the light must be left burning all night, and Annette must also sleep nearby, and Sebastian and John must come down and pass the night in the corridor to call out the frighten the ghost if they saw it coming. Clara was very much excited, and the housekeeper had much trouble in making her listen to reason. She promised to write Mr. Seisman, as well as to bring her bed to Clara's room and not to leave her alone at night. She decided, however, that they should not all sleep in Clara's room. If Adelheid were afraid too, Annette could go to sleep with her. But Heidi was far more afraid of Annette than of ghosts, of which indeed she had never before heard. She said at once that she was not afraid, and would much rather sleep alone in her room. Miss Rottenmeier hastened to her writing desk and sent off a letter to Mr. Seisman to the effect that the unnatural condition of affairs in his house, recurring as it did every night, was likely to have a bad influence on the health of his delicate daughter. The worst consequences might follow, instances being known of epileptic attacks or St. Vitus's dance being brought on by such excitement as Clara was now under, owing to these nightly alarms. This letter was successful. 2 days later, Mr. Seisman stood before the house and pulled the bell with such violence that the servants all stood looking at each other with the fear that now the ghost had become bolder and begun to play its tricks in broad day. Sebastian peeped out through a half-open shutter cautiously, but such a determined clang now resounded through the hall that the servant suspected a man's hand to be the cause, and a hand that he recognized too. So he hurried downstairs headlong. Mr. Seisman greeted Sebastian but shortly and went straight to his daughter's room. The joyful welcome that he received from her face and her face of gladness he received from her and her face of gladness soon smoothed the wrinkles that had gathered on his forehead, and they vanished entirely when she assured him that she felt perfectly well and that it did not matter now she had him fast if a ghost did walk at night, for without the ghost she should not have had her father. And pray, how is the specter getting on, Miss Rottenmeier? Asked Mr. Seisman, the corners of his mouth twitching a little. I assure you, sir, was the earnest reply, it is not a joking matter. Tomorrow morning Mr. Seisman will not think of laughing, for what nightly takes place in this house now points clearly to something terrible that has taken place here at some former time and been concealed. There I am ignorant, replied the gentleman, but I must beg of you not to make my entirely respected ancestors appear in a character of persons under suspicion. Now call Sebastian into the dining room that I may speak with him. In the dining room, the master of the house acted on the observation that he had made concerning the little love that existed between Sebastian and the housekeeper. In the dining room, the master of the house acted on the observation that he had made concerning the little love that existed between Sebastian and the housekeeper. Come here, my man, he said, and beckoned his servant to approach. Tell me honestly, has there not been some trickery here to pull Miss Rottenmeier about a little? No, upon my truth, the gracious master must not think that. I do not feel at all comfortable about the thing myself, replied man with unmistakable veracity. Very well, in that case, I will soon show such brave fellows as Sebastian and John how ghosts look by daylight. Shame upon you, Sebastian, a strong young fellow like you, to run away from a ghost. Now take my compliments to my old friend, Dr. Klassen, and ask that he come to me without fail at 9 o'clock this evening. I have traveled from Paris expressly to consult him. He must watch tonight with me, so very bad is the case, and must make his preparations accordingly. Am I understood? Perfectly, perfectly. The gracious master may be sure that I shall repeat the message correctly. Punctually at 9 o'clock, just as the children and Miss Rottenmeier withdrew for the night, appeared the good doctor, who under his gray hair had a fresh complexion and a pair of bright, kindly eyes. His anxious looks soon gave place to a merriment after the first greeting, and tapping his friendly friend gaily on the shoulder, he said, Well, well, you do look as if you were in need of a watcher, old friend. Only be patient a while, old fellow. The person for whom we are to watch will look ill enough when we have captured him. What is this? A sick person in the house, and one who is to be caught? Far worse, far worse. A ghost in the house. We are haunted. Dr. Klassen laughed outright. That is a pleasant way of taking my news. It's a pity my friend Rottenmeier can't enjoy it with you. She is convinced that some old Seisman is wandering about here to expiate some horrible crime. Where has she made his acquaintance, pray? Asked the doctor, still very much amused. Let me move this way. Mr. Seisman now told his friend the story and added that he has made preparations for whatever might be discovered. He had 2 loaded pistols, for the affair was either one of very objectionable kind, of a joke that some of the servants' acquaintances had played upon them during his absence, and in this case, a slot or 2 in the air would do no harm, or there was really a thief who wished to establish the idea of a specter in order to pursue his depredations undisturbed, in which case also a good weapon would be useful. While talking this over, the gentleman descended the stairs and entered the room where John and Sebastian had passed their eventful night. On the table stood some bottles of good wine. Refreshment would not come amiss if the night were to be spent in watching. The revolvers lay beside the bottles, and a couple of branched candlesticks, shedding a clear light around, stood there too. Mr. Seisman had no idea of waiting for the ghost in partial darkness. Now the door was pushed to prevent too much light from penetrating into the corridor, which might make the ghost feel shy. The two gentlemen seated themselves comfortably in their armchairs and entertained themselves with all sorts of stories, taking now and then a sip of wine until 12 o'clock sounded. They had not thought it to be so late. The ghost has got wind of us and will not show itself tonight, said the doctor. It does not walk till 1, said his friend. Then talk began afresh. 1 o'clock sounded. It was perfectly still, not a sound to be heard. Suddenly the doctor raised his finger. Do you hear nothing, Seisman? They listened intently. Softly but distinctly, they heard the bar. Here's the picture. From the house door moved, and the key turned twice in the lock. Then the door was opened. You are not afraid? Asked the doctor and rose. It is well to be cautious, whispered Mr. Seisman, and took a candlestick in one hand and a revolver in the other. The doctor had preceded him, similarly equipped. They stepped into the corridor. A white figure, lighted up by the moonlight, stood motionless on the threshold of the wide-open outer door. Who goes there? Thundered the doctor, and with weapons and lighted candles, both gentlemen approached the figure. It turned about and uttered a low cry. There stood revealed little Heidi with naked feet in her white nightgown, staring with dazzled eyes at the bright lights and flashing revolvers, and quivered like a leaf in the wind from head to feet. I really believe it is your little water carrier, said the doctor. Child, what does this mean? What are you doing? Why have you come down here? Asked the master of the house. White as snow from fear, Heidi answered almost inaudibly. I do not know. Now the doctor stepped forward. Seisman, said he, the case belongs to my province. Go seat yourself in your armchair. I will first of all carry this child back where she belongs. So saying, he laid his revolver aside, took the trembling child by the hand, and with a fatherly tenderness, led her upstairs. Do not be afraid. There is nothing to fear, he said kindly as they ascended. Now be quiet. There is nothing to be troubled about. Having reached Heidi's room and set down his light, he took the child in his arms, put her in her bed, and covered her up carefully. Then, seating himself on a chair by the bedside, he waited patiently until the tremors had subsided. At last, taking Heidi's hand in his, he said soothingly, Now that everything is right again, just tell me, where were you going? I was not going anywhere. I did not go down there myself. I was all at once there. Well, did you dream anything in the night? Do you remember seeing or hearing anything? Yes, every night I dream the same thing. I think I am with my grandfather. I hear the wind in the pines and the stars are shining in the sky, and I jump up quick and open the door of the hut, and oh, it is so beautiful. But when I awake, I am always in Frankfurt. And Heidi began to sob and fight with the trouble that swelled her little throat almost to bursting. And have you no pain nowhere? None in your back or head? No, only it hurts me here a little, here like a big stone all the time, as if you had eaten something and wished to throw it off? No, not like that, as if I must cry. And then do you cry very hard? Oh no, I try not to cry, for Miss Rottenmeier has forbidden it. So you swallow it down till the next time? That is the way? Yes, I understand. And you like it here in Frankfurt, do you? Oh, yes. But the reply sounded as if it meant, oh, no. And where did you live with your grandfather? Always on the elm. That couldn't have been so very agreeable. Tiresome, was it not? Oh, no, it was beautiful, so beautiful. Heidi could contain herself no longer. The flood of longing, the agitation of the last half hour, the long restrained tears overpowered her strength, and she burst forth into violent weeping. The doctor stood up, smoothed the child's pillow, and said kindly, "Yes, cry a little now, and it will do you good. Then go to sleep. Go to sleep quietly, and tomorrow everything shall be right." Then he left the room. Once again downstairs, the doctor seated himself in the armchair opposite to his anxious host. "In the first place, Seisman," he said, "I must tell you that your little protege is moonstruck. In total unconsciousness, she has played the ghost and opened your house door every night and frightened your servants. In the second place, she is suffering from homesickness, so that she is reduced almost to a skeleton, and soon will be one if this goes on. An immediate remedy is necessary for the first trouble and the extremely excited state of her nerves. There is only one cure, and that is to send the child back to her native mountains. For the second, naturally the same thing is needed, her home. My prescription is that she must leave Frankfurt tomorrow." Mr. Seisman sprang from his chair and began walking rapidly up and down the room. At last he broke out, "Moonstruck, sick, homesick, reduced to a skeleton in my house, Klassen? All this within my doors, and nobody has attended to her? Nobody knew anything about it? And you, doctor, you wish that this child who came to us fresh and strong should be sent back to her grandfather, ailing and famished? No, you cannot ask that. I will not do it. I cannot. Take the little one in hand. Cure her. Do what you think best. Only cure her. Then I will send her back whenever she wishes. You must help us." "Seisman," replied Dr. Clausen impressively, "bethink yourself. This condition is not an illness to be cured by pills and powders. The child is not of naturally strong constitution, but if she is allowed to return to the strengthening mountain air, which she is accustomed to, and which she needs, she will be perfectly strong again. Seisman, you would not have her return to her grandfather incurably ill, or return no more." From sheer alarm, Mr. Seisman stood still and stared at the solemn doctor. "Of course, if you talk so, Klassen, there is no choice. It must be as you say." He took his friend's arm, and they walked back and forth, talking the case thoroughly over and making plans, until it was morning, when the master of the house opened the door to let his friend out, and bright sunlight streamed in. I was cooking. That's why I'm in these clothes. The next chapter, chapter 13, A Summer Evening on the Elm. Yay! This is Dr. Annette Feravich. Thanks for joining me here in the reading room. We are here in the classroom to get us a healthier mind, a healthier body, and a healthier spirit. And sometimes we just need to take time to read a story. Thanks for joining me. Reading the classic story, Heidi.